Have you ever looked at the news and heard mind-boggling numbers about national debt? Trillions of dollars. It makes you wonder, if almost every country is in debt, who on earth do they all owe money to? Is there some secret intergalactic bank we don't know about? Well, the answer is a lot closer to home, and it's a fascinating story about how our global economy actually works. Let's start with the basics. Why do governments borrow money in the first place? Think about your own household budget. Sometimes, your expenses might be more than your income, so you might use a credit card or take out a loan. Governments do the same thing, but on a much, much larger scale. They need money for all sorts of things: building roads, schools, and hospitals, funding social programs like healthcare and pensions, maintaining a military for national defense, and stimulating the economy during a recession. When the money they collect from taxes isn't enough to cover all these expenses, they have a budget deficit. To fill that gap, they borrow. So, who are these mysterious lenders? The answer is surprisingly simple. It's people and institutions, both at home and abroad. This is where we get the concepts of internal and external debt. Internal debt is money a government owes to its own citizens and domestic institutions. When you buy a government bond, you are essentially lending money to your own country. Pension funds, insurance companies, and banks within the country are also major buyers of government debt. External debt, on the other hand, is money owed to foreign creditors. This could be other governments, international corporations, or foreign investors who see a country's bonds as a safe investment. Now, you might think a country could just print more money to pay its debts. And for some countries, that's partially true. A country that issues its own currency, like the United States with the dollar or Japan with the yen, has a bit more flexibility. They control the money supply. This power gives lenders more confidence that they will be repaid, even if it's with newly created money, allowing these countries to borrow more easily and at lower interest rates. However, just printing money without a corresponding increase in economic output is a recipe for disaster. It leads to hyperinflation, where the currency becomes worthless, and nobody wants that. Think of post-World War I Germany or modern-day Zimbabwe. So, it's a power that must be used with extreme caution. So, the debt is borrowed. But how does it grow into such colossal figures? It's a bit like a snowball rolling down a hill. Each year a government has a deficit. It adds to the total pile of debt. But that's not all. The government also has to pay interest on all the money it has already borrowed. This interest payment itself becomes a major government expense. If a country is constantly running deficits, the total debt, the principal, plus the accumulating interest can grow exponentially over time. This cycle of borrowing to cover old debts and new spending is how we end up with national debts that are larger than a country. As entire annual economic output, or GDP. Here's the really counterintuitive part. Most countries have no intention of ever fully paying off their national debt, and that's actually by design. For a large, stable economy, debt isn't seen as a household loan to be paid off by a specific date. Instead, it's a permanent feature of the financial system. The goal isn't to reach zero debt. The goal is to manage it responsibly. As long as the economy is growing, the country can handle its interest payments and continue to roll over the debt. This means when an old bond comes due, the government simply issues a new bond to pay it off. As long as investors have faith in the government's ability to pay, this can go on indefinitely. It's the confidence in the system that keeps the wheels turning. But what happens when that confidence falters? What if a country can't repay its debt? This is when a debt crisis can occur. It's particularly dangerous for countries that have a lot of external debt denominated in a foreign currency, like the US dollar. If their own currency weakens, their debt burden suddenly becomes much larger in local terms. If a country defaults, it can be catastrophic. Its borrowing costs will skyrocket, making it nearly impossible to get new loans. It can trigger a severe recession, high unemployment, and painful austerity measures, meaning drastic cuts to public spending. Often, these countries have to seek bailouts from international organizations like the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, which usually come with strict conditions. Let's look at some examples. Japan has one of the highest debt-to-GDP ratios in the world, over 260%. Yet, it's not considered to be in crisis. Why? Because the vast majority of its debt is internal, owned by its own citizens and the Bank of Japan. Lenders have high confidence in the stability of the Japanese government. On the other hand, Countries like Argentina have faced repeated debt crises because a large portion of their debt was external, and a history of defaults has eroded investor confidence. The United States has the largest nominal debt in the world, but because the US dollar is the world's primary reserve currency, there is a constant global demand for its bonds, keeping its borrowing costs low. So why does global debt just keep rising? It's a combination of all these factors. Aging populations in many developed countries mean higher spending on pensions and healthcare. The global financial crisis of 2008 and the recent pandemic forced governments worldwide to borrow massively to support their economies. Low interest rates over the last couple of decades have also made borrowing cheaper and more attractive. It seems that, in the modern economy, borrowing is the path of least resistance for funding government activities. This brings us to the final, trillion-dollar question. Is this ever-growing mountain of global debt a ticking time bomb? Are we heading for a future global financial crisis? Experts are divided. Some argue that as long as major economies keep growing and interest rates don't spike uncontrollably, the situation is manageable. They believe that the tools for managing debt are well understood. Others are more concerned. They worry that the sheer scale of the debt makes the global financial system more fragile and vulnerable to shocks. A sudden loss of confidence in a major economy could trigger a chain reaction, a domino effect with unpredictable consequences. The truth is, we're in somewhat uncharted territory. The global debt-to-GDP ratio is at an all-time high. Managing this will require careful policy, international cooperation, and a bit of luck. So, the next time you hear about national debt, you'll know it's not owed to aliens. It's a complex web of borrowing and lending between governments, citizens, and institutions right here on Earth. It's a system that fuels our economies, but also carries significant risks. Understanding it is key to understanding the world we live in. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this explanation helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into how our world works. See you next time.